information? Thank you. Let me just give you a little background on our esteemed speaker today. This is Dr. Linlin Wang, who recently graduated from Temple University with a PhD in applied linguistics. And she has a master's degree in TESOL from our own University of Pennsylvania up the street. And she also has a degree from Beijing in Chinese as a foreign language. So she's been doing this work for more than 7 years, and now she's an adjunct professor at University of Pennsylvania, Lehigh, and Temple University, and even one more, right?
Montgomery College, yeah.
Yeah, she's busy. She's like a little bee buzzing all over the place. But anyway, I just wanted to focus you in on the topic so you can kind of like close your eyes and think about how you've been doing it. And our topic today is the effect of visuals on learners' second language listening behavior. So if you can kind of get that concept. And now Linlin is going to make us even more proficient at it than we were before. So take it away, Dr. Yang.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Well, I'm still in this transition mode to trying to figure out my clear career path. That's why I'm doing all these adjunctive works. But at the same time, I also identify myself as a language learner, lifelong learner. And so that's also part of the reason why I did my topic. But before I start my sharing, I would like to launch a very short poll. If you could kindly click the link, or you can just you can go to this website. So we're going to have this very short poll for us to first talk about our background. So the first question would be, how would you identify yourself? Would you be an ESL instructor more, or a researcher, textbook or test developer, or any other status? Can you open the link actually?
I'm going to try.
Okay, let me slow down. Oh, others. Yeah, ESL instructor. Or if you want to pull out your phone using your browser, I think we can also open that link in that way.
Start the survey. 6 questions.
Yep. Oh, researcher. Cool. Oh, retrieved. Oh, ESL instructor. Okay, I think many of us are ESL instructors, and possibly we also do some research. We also develop our own classroom materials and other tests as well. So for this question, I just was going to quickly understand the context so that I can better adjust my presentation today. Yeah, for the second question, what first comes to your mind when talking about L2 listening? So yeah, big listening and students. I really love that because when I teach, I always want to make my classroom student-centered and focus on all these different things like fly. What's the fly? Maybe the time would fly very fast, like the flow is very good. Yeah, so we want to emphasize comprehension, capability. We want to help students, providing a lot of scaffoldings and give them training.
Oh, wow.
Anybody wants to jump in and share your thoughts? It's okay, it's just at the beginning. So this is just brainstorm. So yes, we have a lot of good words. And I am actually very, very, I don't know, happy to see that nobody mentions visuals, which is cool because I hope that my presentation would add that word to our minds in the future when we talk about listening. Yeah, so for the next question, a good listening test doesn't need to incorporate pictures or videos. How do you believe in this statement? Whether you believe in that. So some of you said maybe, some are saying not sure, or nah, yeah, we don't need to incorporate pictures or videos. So this, a lot of you chose that. Okay, so let's see whether my presentation will change any of your answers. And the next statement, okay, students don't need to be taught to pay attention to fillers, connected speech, and back channels, etc. All these authentic features. Well, actually, you don't need my presentation because all of us are like, yeah, well, we need to expose our students to these authentic features. And I'm going to share more about why I also believe so. So the next question, students should take as many notes as possible while taking a listening test. Many of us would agree to a great extent to this statement. And I'm also going to say, let's see whether my research supports this as well. Okay, and the next statement, using multiple choice questions, I should say questions, in the listening test is a great way to assess students' listening ability. Maybe, not so sure, in the middle. Okay, so I can see that we're all engaged in critical thinking a lot, some advantages, some disadvantages, and I'll show you more about my research findings regarding this statement as well. And the very last question, no questions anymore. Yeah, note taking was the last one. Okay, so first off, thank you very much for providing your background and your insights. And as I mentioned, hopefully through my presentation today, some of us possibly would think about all these statements in a quite different way. So next, I'm going to actually start my presentation, but sorry, I would like to make it a little bit convenient for myself to present.
Wow.
So bear with me for a minute, please. I'm going to use my presenter view. Hopefully this works. Yes, awesome. Could you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for coming today. And we just finished our little survey. So for my official presentation, I would like to start with my favorite quote. I feel a very unusual sensation. If it is not indigestion, I think it must be gratitude. So I'd like to first spend a couple minutes to express my appreciation to the audience. And to do that, I'm going to first turn off my camera a little bit for a little bit, and I'm going to explain it in a second. So I would like to first thank TESOL East for giving me this wonderful chance to share my research, and especially thank you for your flexibility because of my schedule was changed. Also, I want to thank everybody who comes here today. Thank you for your time and attention. And I'd like to thank my dissertation committee, Dr. Elvis Wagner, Jill Swively, Paul Toth, and Russ Suvaru. They have really helped me greatly in this whole process. I really appreciate their help and support. Okay, and so here I am back. So I actually have a quick listening test for you all. How many people were there on Linlin's dissertation committee? Some of you probably don't remember. Yeah, I saw. Yeah, 3 or 4. 4 actually is the correct answer. Some of you may know this or infer from your previous experience, or maybe you are a very good listener, quote unquote, and passed my test. But I'm sure if I showed you this when I was speaking, right, Dr. Elvis Wagner, Jill Swively, Paul, and Russ, you probably have a totally different way to understand and approach this understanding. So that is exactly what I wanted to investigate for my dissertation topic. So for today's presentation, I'm going to walk you through these 3 WH questions: why I came to this idea, a brief summary of my dissertation, and so what, some very interesting and striking findings. Hopefully you find it interesting too. So why this topic? Very similar to what Mac actually was talking about, it's just so hard for us to live without visuals. When I first applied to graduate schools in the United States, I took this TOEFL test, right? So as an international student who's not a native English speaker. So I got 30 out of 30 on my listening test, which was just amazing. But when I actually came here, I couldn't really follow everybody's conversations because everyone is talking so fast. So I was immediately questioning the authenticity of the spoken text I encountered in my textbooks and in the tests that I took. And visuals are just so important. In COVID, we just wish that nobody is wearing masks so that we can read the lips, we can see the visuals, we can see the facial expressions. And the last story is even funnier. When the toilet of my first apartment was clogged, I called the maintenance guy, and he kept asking me. He was like, "Did you flush?" I mean, a toilet, there are only a few things that we can do with it. But I really didn't want to destroy my whole apartment. But I guess the guy didn't have a lot of interactions with non-native English speakers. And so he kept saying, "Did you flush? Did you flush?" And I just wished, I can see this little thingy, or like we can zoom and he can show me what it means so that everything would be much easier. So all these scenarios have led to my interest in authentic materials used in classrooms and language tests. In particular, there has been this mismatch of the modalities between language tests and real-world tasks. Theoretically, we argue for utilizing authentic materials in a language test to match what learners may encounter in the real-life situations. And my experience also provided practical evidence for this argument. Therefore, for my dissertation, I wanted to understand the effect of visuals in an auto listening test so that I can further advance our current practice in language tests and materials design. So I think at least the first part of my presentation today will be a little technical and theoretical, and hopefully for the last part, I can make it more interactive and hopefully it's useful. So let's briefly talk about the literature and see what other people have found. So listening is a fundamental language skill to the development of others, but it has long been the least understood and the least researched one. It's just hard and it's receptive. We can't see what's going on, and it's even harder for us to describe what was going on when we were listening to something. Especially with the rapid development of technology, multimedia input has become more feasible in a listening test. Therefore, there has been a contentious issue as to whether visuals should be included as opposed to the traditional audio-only tests, especially in the academic context. So that's exactly what I was focusing on. The most relevant and unresolved issue related to the use of visuals in the literature is how they actually affect test takers' listening performance or their test scores. The majority of the studies found that visuals facilitate students' test scores for a lot of different reasons. However, it's still not consistent. Some studies found that no, it's actually hindering students' performance. Some studies say that no, there's no difference, or they're only facilitative for certain tasks. And I think one of the most the biggest issue is that we tend to categorize visuals as either content only or context only. Content only would be like a PowerPoint slide with different captions or different keywords. And context visuals, according to the scholars, they would think it's only about the context. For example, the speaker, how I look like, what I look like, or the background, like a classroom. However, many visuals, they actually contain both content and context. So with that dichotomous problematic categorization in mind, I feel like a lot of studies really couldn't justify their findings that to like 100% degree. So that's the first kind of big category of research. And the second big category is to evaluate how test takers really interact with the visual information in a listening test. Or we can say, what exactly are they doing when they take the test? For this body of literature, a lot of researchers, they have this intention to say, yes, we want to use authentic materials because, right, we have visuals. However, not all of them are using unscripted, authentic spoken texts. They're actually using scripted texts, but incorporating visuals, which kind of deviated from the original intention to have authentic materials in the test. So in my study, I created this test with semi-authentic lectures delivered at Temple University to undergraduate students. So that's one of the things that I was trying to address. Another thing is that a lot of the studies, they have these two groups of students taking tests with either visuals or no visuals. However, when they asked them to report what they were doing during the test, they only focused on the audio-visual group, whereas the students in the audio-only group were left out. So without this comparison, I was thinking maybe we can't actually see all the unique behaviors or the processes undergone through these two conditions. So I compared these two groups in my study as well. Another part of the gap is that a lot of the self-reports that the participants did was delivered in English, the participant's second language. However, we know that listening is so abstract, and it actually calls for a very high English proficiency as well. So I think I can try to use the shared language with the participants and myself so that I can get more in-depth recall data. And lastly, I think one of the very, very important listening process is for students to take notes. However, for the majority of the existing literature investigating visuals, they didn't actually investigate how test takers take notes while engaging in audiovisual kind of stimuli. So I actually dig the big hole for myself, and I was trying to understand this entire picture of what's going on through an entire listening test, including from the beginning all the way until when they answer the questions. So basically, this was my whole goal to achieve. And fortunately, I did. I finished that. So let me briefly talk about what I did, a brief summary of the dissertation research design. So I focused on 3 areas or aspects in my research to address all those gaps and to achieve my ambitious goal. So first, I wanted to know how visuals affect test takers' performance using authentic materials. So 190 participants took in my first component to the study. Half of them took an audio-only version of the test, where they could only hear the speakers, and the other half took the audio-visual version of the test, where they could both see and hear the speakers, but the tests were actually identical. So as I mentioned, the test was specifically designed for this research. I recorded semi-authentic undergraduate level lectures, developed the questions, validated and revised them. After getting participant scores, I then statistically compared the scores and found that, yes, visuals significantly improved their test scores, even after adjusting their initial listening ability. So that's my first big component, which addressed the first kind of big gap in the literature. And then for the second and third component, these two were actually a huge qualitative analysis. So for the second part, I investigated how visuals affected their test-taking processes while listening. So I randomly sampled 10 participants from each group, recorded their test-taking processes, and asked them to report in Chinese how they attended to different areas of visual attention, how they took notes, and how they identified the authentic features, such as connected speech and filled pauses. So for this part, I used a technique called retrospective cued recall, where the participants' test-taking recordings were played and paused to probe their recall of their test taking processes. And in order to do so, I analyzed the lecture scripts and decided where to pause based on the idea units. And also I designed some probing questions to facilitate the recall. Lastly, I wanted to understand how visuals affected their processes when they answered the comprehension questions, because answering, kind of producing a response in whatever way is also part of an entire listening process. So the same 20 participants also talked about what sources of information they used to select their answers. And I also correlated their note quality with their test scores, trying to figure out whether there's any relationship between their notes and their test scores. And to evaluate the note quality, I evaluated the number of correct notes they took, the overall organization of the notes, and the number of incorrect notes. But I found no substantive relationship between note quality and test performance in both conditions. Sorry that I talked pretty fast. But I think the actual design wasn't that interesting, but the findings should be more interesting. So I would like to devote more time to talk about the findings. And as you probably noticed, that I intentionally skipped the results of the second component to my study. So this would be a little bit more detailed. I found that first here, so when presented with visuals, or videos in my case, the test takers did alter their visual attention to a great extent. So they reported that they attended to the visuals in about 80% of their comments, but for the audio only group, when they were presented with like a black screen, as in our traditional audio only listening test, they only attended to the screen about 25% of the time. So the visuals attracted their attention. And also through their comments, they mentioned a lot of distinctive benefits of visuals. For example, visuals provided hints to understand the lecture. Visuals also promoted positive effect, like they felt happier because they can see the speakers. They felt less anxious just because they can feel the overall environment. And also visuals help them stay motivated, stay more concentrated, etc. However, visuals also posed some distinctive challenges as well. The most difficult one is that they felt like they didn't have enough time to take notes while also looking at the visuals. And also sometimes there are some culturally bounded gestures that they felt very difficult to interpret. For example, the air quotes. A lot of the participants say that they couldn't figure out what that means, so that basically interacted their whole understanding. So that's the first part about how they interacted with the visuals. In terms of the notes, kind of counterintuitively, when presented with visuals, the test takers were more likely to take notes. So they actually took more notes, and they took more meaningful notes as defined in the literature. So they were more likely to write down the key ideas of the lectures, the overall structure of the lectures, and they were more likely to use their own words to paraphrase what they heard. So based on this part of data, I inferred that when students are exposed to visuals, they are more likely to engage in higher top-down, higher level processing, because they focus more on understanding the overall structure and predicting what's going to be listened to, and also took more notes. So this is the second part about note-taking. For the third part about the authentic features, so it's also very interesting that the audiovisual participants, they were slightly less likely to hear and report authentic features. To be a little bit more specific, they reported hearing slightly fewer instances of connected speech. For example, are we familiar with connected speech? Somewhat. So when we talk, for example, we do not talk like this, but we talk like this. So we connect phrases together so that we sound more natural and we talk faster. A lot of the consonants were dropped. A lot of the vowels may sound different. So for these audiovisual students, they reported hearing fewer instances of connected speech, and they valued more of a smooth delivery of the lecture. And also they reported hearing fewer instances of filled pauses. For example, okay, well, these things. They felt like they didn't hear as many as the audio only participants. And they felt like all these filled pauses were distracting. They were like, why are these things interrupting my listening? On the contrary, for the audio only participants, when they could not see the speakers, they felt like connected speech was more distracting because it's too fast and they felt hard to segment all the words. But filled pauses were helpful for them to give them some time to take a break, to process what has been delivered so far. And so in these two different conditions, they processed authentic features in different ways. And the last part about how they answered the comprehension questions, very interestingly, the audiovisual participants reported using fewer test wise strategies. So they could understand the lectures better, and they could retrieve more of the memory to better understand the comprehension. So after writing all of these, it took me like over 300 pages. But I think the amazing part of this is that because I basically looked at every single aspect of a whole listening test, I can connect them, and all these different processes connected with each other to explain my first quantitative finding that visuals enhanced test performance. And I actually provided evidence to say, hey, this is why, exactly why the visuals were helpful and why we need it to strive for the best so that we can help students to get better scores, to better indicate their listening abilities. And also theoretically speaking, because when students are exposed to visuals, they are undergoing such a different process, listening process compared to our traditional audio only listening test. If we still use our audio only tests, the cognitive validity of the test is not ensured. So one of my biggest dreams is to communicate more with test developers and hopefully curriculum designers so that they can start to initiate this action to incorporate more visuals in listening tests, because I know how hard it is for us ESL instructors to plan and to create our own like videos, like who are we going to record to give this authentic test. And it's even more than authentic. It's more for our students to know what exactly is going to be happening in real world listening tasks. So that's my biggest argument. But because we don't have that many curriculum designers or test developers today, my last part of the presentation would be some relatively relevant implications for teaching and learning. And hopefully this is going to be more useful for the audience. So the first part is that I actually suggest to, I call for this explicit instruction on visual use for our learners. And since we probably don't have enough time, but can I invite one or two audience to share how you address visuals in your listening classes? Do you teach this, or do you feel like this is something you really could address more in the future?
Leland, may I?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Leland, do visuals include writing?
I think so, yes.
Okay, well, when I play podcasts for my English 202D class at Penn State, I always write key points on the board as the podcast is going. And the students say they really appreciate that, because just to listen to the podcast cold is nearly impossible, even if I've had them listen to it the night before from homework. So thank you for vindicating what I'm doing.
Thank you. I justify what we're doing. That's really nice, because students need the scaffolding. And it's really, a lot of times, even in real world situation, when we listen to a lecture, the professor would give us PowerPoints or like give us some scaffolded notes. So that's real. That's not something to actually decrease the difficulty level of listening task. That's exactly what students will be doing. Thank you so much. And Francie, I see you're raising the hand.
Oh, yeah, that's directed to me. First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Oh my
Thank
gosh,
you.
it's so excited because I use visuals a lot. I think probably everybody who's listening uses visuals, but in particular for vocabulary, because student will ask a question. It's like, okay, I could explain it in their second or third language, and what it would be is that all my words would just go, because I know what it's like to learn a second language, would just go right through. It would mean nothing really, but if I put some visual on the board, it would mean much more. And I've done that, consistently. So to be able to see your research and findings is just exhilarating.
And I remember your interview where you brought those big, huge visuals.
Yeah.
Oh,
Francie's remembering, she was on my search committee and interview at CCP, and I brought a lot of visuals. I was teaching the conditional, I think, in my job interview. Yeah, that's true. It's like, it's a habit, it's like, our poor students don't understand what we're talking about. So we have to make it easier.
yeah.
Huge, lovely paintings, enormous.
That's really great.
When like Leslie and I would teach, we taught like about Frank Gehry, the architect, or we have big posters of his work, the buildings. I mean, it's standard. Anyway, so you're getting, so let's go back to you. Thank you. Let's go back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think that's really great. And that's also one of the points that I made in my writing, that the classroom teachers are using this. Why don't you test us? Why don't you test the students to do this? Because we provide students with visuals, all kinds of visuals. And also, I think I would like to add just one point that based on the result that some students had specific like difficulties processing cultural bounded visuals, that is something that we really want to know more as teachers ourselves, and also teach students more explicitly. For example, that air quote thing, like in China, we don't have this. So students thought, why, like the teacher isn't saying anything about two, why is she doing this? And I know that typically when we nod our heads, it's like yes, but in Bulgaria, this is no. So these things, are really, really going to be affecting students' real world listening skills. So I think we definitely need to equip ourselves with this knowledge as well. And by saying that, I'm not saying we should teach like the so-called English gestures, but because English is getting to the status as a lingua franca for everybody, so we should encourage students to also share their norms as well, so that we share this community of visuals and English. So that's about the visual use. And about note-taking, I know a lot of us in the beginning survey say that we do want to encourage students to take as many notes as possible. But actually, I'm going to say something opposite, because the last part of my research didn't actually find a connection between test scores and the amount of correct notes they took. So I would say students have their agency to monitor their note-taking process. So the amount actually doesn't really matter that much. If they feel like I'm not actually understanding and I'm taking notes and I don't understand my notes either, why not we suggest them, focus on processing, focus on understanding the whole process. And if you can, of course, you can take some notes. But if you feel like your overall listening is interrupted, don't do that because that doesn't necessarily contribute to their test scores. So I feel like that is something that I really would like to mention for this part of the study. The third part about the authentic features, this is actually my favorite part because I've been doing this a lot. So yes, a lot of us say that, yes, we do need to teach students authentic features explicitly. And actually, here are some resources. I think we can share, like I can share with the teachers. So first off, the first book written by Brown. This is a book specifically devoted to connected speech. So what they are, how can we talk about it with students? And a lot of times we don't need to teach students like for a whole 2 hours. We can incorporate like 10 minutes teaching units every day, just practice it, try to connect things together. And the second, third, and no, sorry, Emmerich one, this Wagner one, and this Wang one. So basically we three all together wrote these 3 practical articles 3 years ago. We tried to design some simple lesson plans or simple activities to raise students' awareness of field pauses, back channeling, and connected speech. So hopefully these could be helpful as well. Also, Elvis Wagner, my advisor, he's a big expert in authentic features. And in these 2 short chapters and articles, he had some general guidelines for us to explicitly teach authentic features to students. So if you feel like these are helpful, hopefully, please feel free to take a look. And they're not very long, which I like. And talking about the last part, this is also where I hope I can hear more from the audience. So in terms of the question answering approaches, what kind of listening tests or listening activities do you design? Do you use multiple choice questions or any other formats in your classroom?
So I think this is a time that Linlin, you really want to hear from us.
Yes.
Any ideas that are bubbling up among the 10 or so of us?
Yeah.
Let's just kind of think about this. Take a minute to just kind of think about the question, and maybe Linlin, maybe you could repeat the question one more time, and then we could kind of take a minute to just breathe on that, and then kind of share whatever bubbles up.
Right. Thank you. So for like in your class, what format of listening tests or activities have you designed? Do you use multiple choice questions more, or like any other questions, any other formats?
Mac, you teach listening.
Yes, Lynn, usually multiple question choices, true, false, short responses also, and explaining something. So it's not only MCQs, it's a variety of questions type that I use while teaching listening.
Thank you.
I also want to discuss with you the authentic features of a language. And first of all, let me tell you that your project is really sound.
Thank you.
Rooted in the work. It's fascinating. I completely
thank you.
My colleague Dr. Lebov on this. It's a wonderful topic. A little bit about my background. I worked as a test reviewer for federal government in US for a few years. My job was a test reviewer. And I wanted to share that perspective with you and with my colleagues who are here. That these tests were designed by experts in the field and would come to the reviewer and we would give our comments. And oftentimes we had some discussions on the issue of including visuals, whether we should include visuals or not. So I want to share some of those discussions.
Definitely.
So many of the colleagues, they were of the view that if you include visuals, you actually do not test language proficiencies of the testees. And the testee might get distracted from the visuals and try to read more meanings based on the visual on the language. That was whole one school of thought. That is why in standard testing, people tend to not give too many visuals. They say, reduce the visuals. However, there was a whole group of researchers who were arguing that in real language, listening never operates without visual. We see each other. Visuals are a part of each other's conversation. And there was a whole debate among us whether we should include visuals or not visuals. So, and the final decision came that, look, visuals might distract and testees can read more meanings based on visuals. That is why they drop. But however, it's your work is very strong. And as an ESL student, former ESL student, I completely agree with you that visuals actually help and they should be a part of it. But there are different schools of thought. I wanted to share with different schools of thought on this topic.
Right. Thank you. I really like that sharing as well, because I was also considering their thoughts because, I think that's the major kind of counter argument for this, my advocacy. But I feel like, first of all, based on all these evidence, students have a variety of different ability to process visuals. And these differences, these variation is exactly what listening should assess, because in real life situations, students do have a variety of different abilities to understand all different visuals. And so these things are construct valid in terms of the construct. And also for like reading visuals, I think that can be associated with the fact that their test scores are increased. But underlining the kind of the scores, I feel like the overall process is different. That's why they understood better. It's not just because they were reading. So that's why I was like, that makes sense, but I still want to, advocate for incorporating visuals. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. And I see
you see the hand. It's either Francie or Joanna.
Hi, this time it's Francie. Hi. Thank you for your presentation, your wonderful presentation. I also want to advocate for visuals. And I wanted to use the example of when I learned my second language, Spanish. So I learned the way I learned the language was visuals and listening only. We did not see the writing until later. And now when I speak Spanish, native speakers tell me, oh, you sound like you're, you pronounce things, properly or correctly, or you sound like a native speaker. So I attribute that to the fact that I could not see the written word and then impose, and I spent ginormous number of hours in the learning lab. Back then we had tapes. This is a long time, I'm old. And I spent so much time on the listening, but the visuals were always there. And even to this day, like they were dialogues, but they were authentic situations. And I still use things from that. And I think it was the input of the visual and the listening when I learned the language. So I want to share
exactly. Thank you. Because I feel like part of my writing, I mentioned that when we have access to visuals, we actually have access to all different kind of processing mechanisms. So it's more than I see a picture, and we can actually be more engaged in the top down higher level processing. So I think that definitely is legitimate. And to kind of circle back to what Mac was saying, I think another reason I've heard that people are reluctant to use visuals is because of the technical requirements. Like how can we make sure that all students have access to this high internet speed so that they can view visuals when they take this listening test. I think that is valid too, but hopefully we can find more ways to solve this technical issue so that we can really let the students actually access all of these benefits of having visuals in the listening test.
We have a quick question here. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mhm.
Why do learners have fewer identifications?
Yeah, I think.
Oh wait, Mac, maybe you could restate this so that I
Yeah.
can mix it up.
Why actually wanted to know why learners have fewer identification of authentic features of target language.
Yeah, so if we say fewer, I think the audio visual participants identified fewer than the audio only participants. My explanation was that because they can process all different types of information, they didn't focus merely on the phonetic level of the input, so that they focus more on constructing an understanding of the overall lecture. But when they did not have this visual, they could only listen to this audio input. So they actually were focusing on the phonemes and specific words. So they caught more of that.
Linlin, can the facilitator ask a question?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. So I noticed, for example, when I'm in Spain or Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic, one of the hardest things for me is like a telephone conversation.
Ooh.
Or like listening to somebody who's trying to tell me something over the phone. So I understand that your study was pretty much, the scope of it was on like formal or informal assessment. But what about people like me who get kind of lost when they're trying to listen to the news? Or like in Italy, it was also new for me, the language. I could just pick up a word here and there.
Yeah.
But Spanish is my second language, and I don't want to miss anything.
I know. Well, that's a very, very good topic. And I have to admit that my whole entire investigation is only on academic listening. And actually, I have another hidden slide saying that I'm not saying that every single listening test should have visuals. Just as you said, the phone conversations, the podcasts, they shouldn't include visuals because that's not what we are going to do. And for those type of contexts, we actually need to train learners to understand word by word, like without visuals.
What I was thinking was that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe there's visuals and maybe there's visualization. So I'm listening to the news, and I know, for example, and I know it's about traffic, and I get this visual in my mind that they're telling me that there's going to be traffic as I approach a certain, let's say, highway or bridge. And maybe that's something that I need to develop not only in myself, but maybe in my students.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And we do, like when we receive this acoustic kind of input, we have this mental representation in our mind, no matter whether it's symbolic or like visual, like actual visuals. I think that is something we can do, like to ask students to talk about what they're thinking, like whether they have this picture in their mind or what they're thinking, so that we can see whether, like, how to help them understand the input.
Thank you.
Dr. Wang, I very quickly, I want to discuss the issue of authenticity in language. It's very wide ocean, but I would actually narrow it down and summarize the current trend about authenticity, authentic materials. And I see the huge tide going in the TESOL world where authenticity is being promoted, that authentic materials is considered as a good materials, right? Now, I want to share with you a different stream of work, which was initiated by A.S. Hornby. A.S. Hornby, he was the first writer of advanced learners dictionaries in Oxford. Now, this stream of work, which was initiated by A.S. Hornby, was slightly different. And actually it goes against the current trend.
Okay.
So the current trend says the more the material is authentic, the better it is, right? So people are saying that teach fillers, teach back channelings, all those connected features. This stream of work, Dr. Wang, was initiated in 20th century, and the whole paradigm was second language learners require simplified input. If second language learners are given connected speech to handle with, their language competencies at the early stages will not develop. So what they came up with in Oxford, they came up with learner's dictionary. That was the first start, that, all right, create materials for learners which are graded. And then they started, and Cambridge reciprocated and started graded readers. So they said, if you ask a second language learner to read a novel written by a native expert speaker for a native expert audience, most probably they're going to be frustrated. So they started graded reading.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share with you, how about teaching simplified graded materials to learners on their proficiency levels, as opposed to giving them completely connected speech with all the authentic features?
I think that's a very, very good point, because I think in terms of like authentic materials, like in genuine materials, like we just take like a podcast from the real world situations, that is not going to be helpful as what we see authentic spoken text in language tests. We do want to tailor the difficulty level of the spoken input to the test takers' proficiency levels. And still, I think even for the beginning levels learners, we should start to expose them to these features as early as possible, so that at least they're ready for that. Although we can, for example, play the audio slowly, or we can give them double play instead of single play, so that we still give them exposure, but not to excessive extent.
Okay.
But thank you so much for the discussion.
And Francie, before we answer your question, we have one more question in the chat, if you don't mind. Professor Bukasa would like to know whether or not we consider language learners' gender, if that had any impact on the visual teaching in your project. We know men, or I won't even say it.
You can say it, Leslie, your friend, all are your friends.
No, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to focus on Professor Bukasa's question.
Okay. Yeah, I really love this question. I did not investigate this in my project, and I kind of avoided it because all the speakers were females. But I did have another project specifically investigating whether students have this reverse linguistic stereotyping. Although that was not for gender, that was on the appearance of the speaker, whether they look Chinese or look native. And fortunately, in my study, I didn't find anything in terms of the appearance. So possibly next time I can investigate something. But if you are very interested in this topic, I think you can, I do have some authors in mind. For example, Kang and Ruben, they had some research on reverse linguistic types. Some are on about gender, some are about like just appearance and how they perceive like the accent or intelligibility of the speakers. In old time, in like 30 years ago, they found this bias towards different genders and different appearances. But hopefully with more research nowadays, we don't see that.
Helen, you seem like you have a question brewing.
Yes, actually. Thank you. Two things I'm thinking about is that like Leslie said, if you're listening, if you're talking on the phone, and I heard students many times say they have difficulty understanding people when they're talking on the phone with them, especially native speakers. And Leslie, you gave such a wonderful example as being learning Spanish, learning a second language. So myself, the teacher, as being also a learner. So it's easy to understand, why students are saying, listening to somebody on the phone is not always easy in a second language. I was also thinking about being at the airport and listening to all these announcements. It is so overwhelming for non-native speakers, but they need to get used to it and be able to, understand whatever announcement pertains to them so that they can act accordingly. So I was thinking also, like, why not combine both kinds of testing with visuals and also testing without any visuals that enable visualization. So if you really want to get comprehensive evaluation of the students' proficiency in listening and processing what they are learning, probably introducing these two types of tests. But I know that takes a lot of preparation, a lot of work, but probably it can give a better idea of, the language proficiency of the student. The other point I was thinking about, which also stems from my students say, thanks. My students say, I want to understand what people are talking with me, when I'm out there, But then also, so what type of language are we exposing students to? Is it the academic language, the formal language, or is it the informal language that they need to understand? Or is it both? And they need to understand the difference between the formal academic or the informal. And then also, of course, their language level. So probably giving them a locator to figure out their language level and then giving them other tests according to their language level. So I was just thinking about these points that, throughout the presentation, but thank you so much. It's a wonderful presentation. I really love it. I love the topic. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and it's really so inspiring. And I think both of your kind of thoughts are intertwined with each other, that we actually need to pay attention to the context or the genre that we want to prepare our students for. If their only goal is to, for example, I just want to understand the academic lectures, I feel like, yeah, maybe visuals. But if they, for example, want to travel, yes, I think the specific genre or type of listening should be like understanding the airport announcement, taking phone calls. So we should absolutely pay more attention according to the context as well.
So
Thank you so
Linlin,
much.
it looks like we're coming to time, but I wanted to thank you on behalf of Penn TESOL East, and thank you, Mac, for inviting our esteemed speaker. And I don't know what our topic is going to be yet for the fall conference, but we would love to have you come back and speak to a wider audience, especially this whole idea of where students were using their first language to do some metacognitive reflection on the process. I find that very, very fascinating. And of course, we didn't really have time to get into that today.
Leslie?
Yes.
Leslie, I see somebody's hands up.
It's Francie.
Raised. Okay.
But William Albertson said, thank you so much.
It's actually Joanna.
Oh, it's Joanna. Okay, this was really great.
It's fine. I think we're out of time. But anyway, I thank you so much. I loved it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Come back again soon, Linlin.
Thank you, for sure, definitely.
And again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Really, wow.
Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I really appreciate this.
It was a wonderful presentation.
You're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right, bye, everyone.
See you next month.
Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day.